The last topic is gun control. And the first question is, on average, nearly 33,000 people in the U.S. die from gun violence. This includes accidents and suicides. More than 2,600 of these people are children. What factors contribute to the comparatively high amount of gun-related deaths in the U.S.? First is Young Americans for Liberty, and then the Republicans.
Oh, they can go.
Okay.
All right, so before I go into my discussion for this talk on gun control, I want to make it known that it's definitely acknowledged that this gun control debate and discussion is especially sensitive for our campus, considering what has happened here before. So I don't want you guys to misconstrue or misinterpret any of my opinions or what I lay out here as being disrespectful towards our campus community. Right now, so the biggest issue with gun violence is not so much responsible gun owners and law-abiding citizens, which would be the citizens that are actually affected by these gun control mandates. We have things such as background checks now. We have a ban on fully automatic assault rifles. The only issue is we don't enforce these things. The FBI does a pretty terrible job of enforcing their background check databases. And we also need better systems to identify and help diagnose mental illnesses.
Okay. Young Americans for Liberty.
I would first like to say that the Libertarian Party view is that the only legitimate use of force is in defense of individual rights. Just let that sink in. I think that prohibiting gun ownership and prohibiting gun use is actually a feminist issue. I would call gun prohibition victim disarmament. It exposes the weakest among us, specifically women, who by nature are smaller and less strong than men, and I wish this was not true, trust me. This makes us susceptible to greater risk of attack, and what guns can do is act as an equalizer. Let's compare two worlds. In one, everyone has a gun, and in one, no one does. In the no-gun world, the inequality of strength means that women are at a general disadvantage in conflicts, increasing the risk of abuse from stronger people. In the universal gun world, however, that background inequality of strength becomes unimportant. A gun is just as lethal in the hands of a woman as in a man, and this removes one key tool of male dominance.
Greens.
Thank you. I'd like to start with something that Hillary Clinton has said: too dangerous to fly, too dangerous to own a gun. This is kind of obvious, and yet it's not in the implementation. We have a lot of disparities between background checks and what security measures need to be met between our many restricted ideologies. So to be on a plane isn't the same as to own a gun, whereas one could potentially be more dangerous than the other. At the same time, we don't have comprehensive background checks at gun shows, and you can inherit weapons from your family without any checking at all. These kinds of things need to happen, and they probably won't because of the NRA lobbying, which needs to also be weakened a lot.
Young Democrats.
On your first day joining the military, you're not handed an M16 and told to just go at it. Without training, you're a hazard to our military, and we need to recognize this as a sign that without training and proper screening procedures, people who own firearms can be a danger to our society. I'm not talking about responsible gun owners who are trained to use their weapons and use them for sport or self-defense. I'm talking about the fact that you can walk into a Walmart and within an hour purchase a firearm. It's as easy as that. We need to improve our screening processes by closing loopholes that allow people to go to gun shows and purchase firearms without background checks. We need to increase the availability of training. If people want to have firearms for sport or for self-defense, they should know how to use them. The fact that it is so easy to obtain a firearm in this country is the reason why they're falling into the wrong hands. And this isn't even taking into account the number of accidental shootings. That may be from people who are owning their guns responsibly and using them responsibly. That amounts to 1,705 people a year who are killed accidentally by firearms. This is what we're being known for as a nation, and we need to do something about it.
Republicans, and then Young Americans for Liberty.
Okay, first thing, I suggest that if you're not familiar with the background checks process, especially here in the state of Virginia, if you go to a gun show, they actually run your background check before you're able to purchase a firearm. I've been there, I've done it. And another thing, you said that you don't want to take this fundamental right away from responsible gun owners, law-abiding citizens, but that there needs to be some mandated training program to make sure that
I
they
didn't
are.
say mandated. I said more available training.
Okay, and what, like, can you
I
describe?
think that the fact that in our military you can't use a firearm until you've been trained with how to use it maybe indicates that we are allowing people to be too easily armed for whatever purpose that they may need. I would advocate for better awareness about how to use firearms safely, better screening processes in general. I didn't say anything about mandatory training or mandated training.
The only way you will be able to own a firearm without training is to buy it illegally. It takes a few hours to get your concealed carry permit to take the entire course. I've done it, and they teach you all about gun safety. And so this notion that buying a gun is easy or it's quick is just false.
You think a few hours is enough?
I think, yeah, that it should be more, I guess.
Young
Yeah.
Americans for Liberty?
I can't,
Okay.
okay.
I want to go back to something the Green Party said. I want to emphasize also that Young Americans for Liberty, or Libertarian Party in general, is okay with background checks. That is a completely normal and acceptable thing for gun owners to go through. But the no-fly list is actually not susceptible to due process. It does not follow any laws or anything. It is literally susceptible to the whim of the government. It is actually currently the subject of a number of different lawsuits against the U.S. government, which is actually kind of funny because they are allowed to not tell or not publicize these lawsuits because it's a private social security or a private national security matter. This no-fly list is actually not used just to combat terrorism, but also to to halt the travel of registered sex offenders and people convicted or suspected of trafficking in illegal narcotics, which goes back to the drug war. There's a lot of problems with the no-fly list. I encourage you to look into it.
Greens?
I feel this just proves the fact that we have a lot of fallacy in our background checks conducted by the government around the board, and perhaps that they need to be more comprehensive or have more of a factual or evidence-based basis for banning or restricting. But I also feel that there are some things that should come to people's attention. The Dickey Amendment in 1996 prevented the CDC from researching gun violence and the effects of gun control. In 2013, President Obama was able to direct the CDC to research gun violence, but only restricted to firearm-related research within the context of our effort to address youth violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, and suicide. So a lot of the statistics that we do have on gun violence and a lot of the studies that we have conducted on gun violence don't actually offer us much of a view at all to the actual problem at large.
Young Democrats and then Young Americans for Liberty.
I wanted to address something that you brought up in the question, which was the number of suicides annually that happen because of guns. That's 22,000 a year with my statistic. And I would argue that having guns so readily available within a few hours of training, you can obtain a permit to have a gun legally, makes the suicide rate increase because people who are not getting access to mental health care that we talked about being important are more easily able to take their own lives. Also, this is the same when we're talking about escalation of incidents. The more people who are armed with firearms, the more likely people are to be injured with firearms. When situations escalate, people who are able to carry firearms can, things can get out of hand. And I'm concerned with the idea that more guns creates more safety, considering how dangerous firearms are and how easily it is to obtain them without proper screening.
Young Americans for Liberty and then College Republicans, and then
Okay.
we'll move on.
All right. The gun issue comes down to one right, the right to self-defense. The right to self-defense. And if you have that right, if you are an innocent, law-abiding citizen, and you are so until proven guilty, so without due process, you cannot take away that right. You cannot, and suicide is not cannot justify taking away this right from all other people out there. The government cannot protect people from themselves. That is not the government's job. The government can protect you from other people, but not from yourself. Thank you.
I would also like to add a little short anecdote. Different states actually have different ways that they allow you to get guns. New Jersey, where I grew up, happens to be a May issue state, which means that you need to show sufficient evidence that shows that you need a gun in order to get one, which people actually like to call a no issue state. In June 2015, a New Jersey woman, Carol Bone, was actually stabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend, who she had a restraining order against. She had installed security cameras, spoken to the police many times, and submitted a permit to purchase a handgun on April 21st, and this happened in June. And she was not allowed to get a handgun by the New Jersey government. I find this very, very terrifying and not acceptable, and I think that every citizen has the right to self-defense.
Okay, so the statement that you made saying that the likelihood of injury by firearm increases as the amount of firearms increases is actually completely false. In your gun-free zones like Chicago and I think Milwaukee, those are gun-free cities. They have the most stringent gun laws in the entire nation, yet those cities experience more gun violence than any other place in America. But then when you look at communities with high gun ownership or large-scale permitting for concealed carry, there are significantly lower crime rates in these areas, particularly in violent crimes, home burglaries, assaults, and rapes.
We have to move on to the final question. It's at Virginia Tech, activist Ryan Martin recently went on a hunger strike to advocate for the ability of students to obtain and use concealed carry permits on this campus. Should students be allowed to carry weapons as long as they are concealed on campus? Why or why not? Greens, you may go first.
Thank you. In 1966, assailant Charles Whitman opened fire on the University of Texas from a clock tower. Witnesses attested that the armed students on campus, of which there were many, added to confusion. The police did not know where the shots were coming from, and when eventually they did finally get up to the clock tower and arrest Whitman, there was so much confusion, many injuries that were totally unnecessary, that were caused by armed civilians that were not trained and were creating a commotion during this really stressful and dangerous time. The IACLEA, which is the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement, has said that there are no credible statistic evidence demonstrating that laws allowing the carrying of concealed firearms reduce crime. In fact, the evidence suggests that permissive concealed carry laws generally will increase crime, and that's coming from the IACLEA.
Young Americans for Liberty.
This is just a very basic statement, but if we consider public colleges to be on public property, government property, then we're entitling them to the same laws as we would any other government land or any other public space, which would be to allow a concealed carry. I would say private colleges are completely different and subject to their own codes, but public colleges are subject to the same laws as U.S. land.
And if I may continue. And again, it comes down to self-defense. Why shouldn't a student have the right to self-defense? Why should they be denied that right while they are on the campus? Now, also, I just want to point out, man, it's baffling like how the Greens and Democrats don't trust the police when it comes to the drug war, but they trust in every other issue.
Okay. Young Democrats.
So one thing I want to point out, public or private, this space that we're in right now is a school. This is a place where young people come to learn, to prepare for their bright futures. And when we increase the number of guns on our campus, especially concealed ones, I argue that we are creating a situation that is ripe for accidental injury and accidental death. I think the situation that the Greens described sums it up perfectly. This adds to confusion. This adds to people's feelings of being scared on campus, especially on a campus where we have seen the impact of mass gun violence and seen the horrors of that situation. I don't think that adding more guns to our campus will make it safer, and I do not think it will help heal us from that situation. Again, I want to point out 1,705 people this year alone have been killed in accidental shootings. That is way too many. One is too many, especially on our campus, especially here.
College Republicans.
I'd like to point out that I'm a local here. I grew up in Radford, and I was actually here when they set up the April 16 memorial. I have family friends that were first responders that addressed the April 16th situation, and one of the biggest things in the area was everybody went out and bought a gun the next day. Like it or not, the right to self-preservation does not stop at any point, because we have a right protected by the government to preserve ourselves using guns and lethal force if we need to, because if we don't have it, I guarantee you Cho Sung-lee would have still found a way to get that gun, and he would have found another way, because he was hell-bent on harming students that day.
Greens and then Young Americans for Liberty.
That's really interesting that you're from this area, but I'm from this area, Blacksburg, Virginia. I've lived here my whole life. Some of the people in this audience I actually recognize from elementary school. Shout out Sam Montgomery and Jeremy back there. So let's get down to the facts of the matter, which is the Huffington Post just published an article out the other day quoting the latest university study on this, and it showed that actually concealed weapon carry on campuses would put students at more endangerment because of the chaotic events and how quickly they occur. So I really would not vote for this sort of proposition that they have going on over here. And another key aspect of this is even when I was going to New River Community College, and this was at the latest gun incident that we have in this community, a teacher of mine was one of those who had her students, and she suffered and her students suffered from a tragic gun accident that occurred here a couple years ago that you guys might remember, and she said, I would never, ever advocate to have concealed gun carry.
Young Americans for Liberty.
I think it should be noted that every mass shooting that has happened in the last few years has been on gun-free zones where the state has made all the people on that zone sitting ducks for some deranged psycho to commit his crimes.
I want to add to that, like the other group said, like this is a place to learn. Sure, this is a place to learn, and it can be chaotic. But life is chaotic. I go to the movies to watch a movie. I go to the road to drive and travel. I don't go to the road to carry a firearm with me, but I need a firearm to defend myself. And it comes down to the right of self-defense. Do I have it or not? And apparently the other groups don't think I do.
Just to add on to that, the thing that really frustrates me about this discussion is that we're assuming that people who are willing to commit these terrible crimes are willing to follow laws and not get guns when they can't. And I think that's just a logical fallacy. Innocent citizens will follow the laws that restrict gun ownership because these are good people. But I think that they should be able to find ways to follow these laws and go through background checks, etc. Because I know that people who are going to commit terrible crimes are not willing to go through these and will obtain guns anyways.
College Republicans.
Okay, so the big thing I want to point out here, they were talking about this Huff piece, hilariously enough, and talking about how if we increase concealed carry on campus, that it would increase the amount of accidents, accidental shootings. It's important to point out that that's an opinion. It's not actually a fact. The amount of concealed carry campuses in the nation is very, very minuscule. It's been a practice, hasn't been used that much. There's actually not much data on it. So for them to make these wild assumptions, it's totally opinion and not facts.
Young Democrats and then the Greens.
So something that never gets brought up when we talk about mass shootings, and also Orlando was not a gun-free space, so I don't really know where that fact came from. But anyways, we never talk about mass shootings being a masculinity issue. If you look at any of the mass shootings in America, across the world, they're perpetrated by males. And I think it comes from an inability for males from a young age to be able to express themselves emotionally. And they're often stifled, told, don't be a girl, or throw like a girl. That's in and of itself sexist. And also not allowing you to express your emotions. And a lot of these mental issues or issues in general that would lead to a mass shooting, I think stem from problems with masculinity. Thank you.
Greens, and then we'll move on to closing statements.
This is another statement by the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Agencies. Campus law enforcement leaders and associations oppose legislation that would allow concealed weapons on campus, not on ideological grounds, but for the simple reason that if they do ever have to respond to an active shooter, they will have no means of differentiating between bad guys with guns and good guys with guns. And in fact, they are trained in active shooter situations to fire at any civilian with a gun immediately, before any other assessment of the situation. They are also entirely unconvinced as law enforcement professionals that concealed weapons would make college campuses safer.
Thank you.